All right, I want to welcome everyone to this edition of Public Leadership Institute's online training. This particular session, titled How to Move Your Issues Forward to Center Stage in 2018, is very timely given where we are in the perpetual election cycle, issue cycle, 24-hour news cycle, in the fall of 2017, looking with a lens towards 2018. We're going to cover a lot of ground and things that elected leadership, activists should be focused on to move the conversation forward and change really the conditions that are necessary to shape outcomes in the 2018 cycle. For those who are first-time joiners of our bi-monthly presentations, my name is Dave Woodward. I'm Public Leadership Institute's National Network Director. In addition to my work with PLI, I'm also a county official and a former state legislator, and I will be serving as your host in today's presentation. Just a little bit of housekeeping for those who are first-time joiners. Public Leadership Institute is a nonprofit, nonpartisan policy think tank and leadership development organization really focused on bringing public attention to those issues around equity and justice. And we work with progressive public leaders at the local and state level to improve the conditions for all working people across the country. You can get a lot of information about Public Leadership Institute at our website, www.publicleadershipinstitute.org. There you'll also find a host of publications that we produce on a regular basis. The Progressive Agenda, which is a policy outline of a host of progressive issues that can be led at the local and state level. Our Voice and Our Values publication, where some of the stuff we're going to be talking about today. We have a special abortion rights project, model policy for advancing abortion rights across the country, and our most recent publication, the Preparing to Win, which is really a guide, and we're also going to talk about today on how to raise attention to the things that we believe in and we're fighting for to serve a variety of purpose. One, to change the conversation, and one that helps give progressive a competitive advantage. Everything from governing to elections to educating the public to stand with progressive champions on these type of issues. This is going to probably be one of our most interactive sessions, we hope. We really want to bring the conversation to make this as relevant as possible for all of you. And to do that, we really need your voices, your participation, your engagement to be that value added and make it as useful as possible for people who are joining us all around the country today. To that end, we have a variety of ways that you can join and participate in today's conversation. If you have audio capabilities where you're joining us, if you click on the hand icon on your control panel and your GoToWebinar control panel, we'll unmute you and you can ask your question live. Do realize that people join us from a variety of places, and that's not always an option. So if you type in your questions in the question bar, we will get to those as quickly as possible to give reaction, to give thoughts, to really help shape how this conversation goes today in a way that's most advantageous to the work that you're doing on the ground and in your locality, wherever you're joining us today from. You can also email me at dwoodward@publicleadershipinstitute.org. We'll get that information. We'll try to get back to you as quickly as possible. It's a little hard to do during the presentation, but if there are any questions, follow up as it relates to this. Another thing a couple of people have actually already asked, will this be made available on afterwards? The answer is yes, and we can share that, and we'll get that information. You can go to our YouTube channel and have access to that. I'll make certain that everyone who's joining us today gets emailed how best to access. You can get not only this session, but all of our past sessions that we do record these sessions to be made available to you and your colleagues to watch at a time more convenient. Okay, without any further ado, I want to introduce no stranger to our sessions here, Bernie Horn, who's going to lead us through this conversation, but really facilitate a conversation about how do we achieve the goal of today's session. Bernie Horn is the Senior Director for Policy and Communications for PLI, communications trainer, an author, a champion for the causes that we believe in. Bernie, thank you very much for being with us this afternoon.
Thank you, Dave.
Great. I'm going to hand over control in just a second. Again, today's topic, for those who just joined, is how to move your issues to center stage in 2018. And so let me, I'm going to hand control over to Bernie here. You can take us through the presentation, and again, have everyone, while Bernie's getting set up, get your questions ready. Type them in the question bar, raise your hand. We'll get to them very shortly. Bernie, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Before I start, I want to kind of repeat a few things that Dave said. We have all these resources for you that are all free, and they're all on our website. Publicleadershipinstitute.org looks like this. The highlights are the Progressive Agenda, which gives you ideas for both state and local progressive legislation. If you look through this on the website and you see an idea that you're interested in, if you hyperlink on that, if you click on the hyperlink, it'll take you to model legislation. So we try to make it as easy as possible. We have our Voicing Our Values messaging guide. This is a brand new edition. The first edition was back in 2012, so here we are 5 years later with our third edition, and it's really up to date, you know, based upon what's happened with Trump in the 2016 election, and it's all you have to do is download it on the website. Here's our abortion rights playbook, which has 29 different model bills on proactive abortion rights. We encourage you to use it, and we support people who want to do proactive abortion rights. So if you want to do one of these bills, contact us and we will work with you very closely. And our newest book is Preparing to Win. This is an advocacy guide. It goes through the steps of how to run, you know, a very thorough and successful advocacy campaign in a legislature, in a city council, in a town council, a county council. And again, it's free. Just go to our website and you can download that. So today, this is going to be a three-part discussion, and after each part, we're going to stop for questions. The first part is why the politics of 2018, next year, the election year, requires progressives to be bold. Two is what type of issues are going to work in 2018 with a bunch of examples. And three is how to promote those issues throughout 2018. We're doing this because this is enormously important. The 2018 election, if progressives don't win that election on all levels, if we don't make tremendous gains in that election on all levels, the whole world is at stake. We really need to have people rise up and reject Trumpism. And, you know, we need to, all of us, do our very best to make that happen for our children, for our grandchildren. So, the first thing I want to talk about is to be bold in 2018. But I'll go to two preliminary matters before I do. As you probably know, PLI is a nonpartisan 501c3 organization. So we're here to talk about winning policy battles and not specifically about winning elections. We're not an election organization. However, nonpartisan groups don't have to act like they're blind to reality. It's not, tax law doesn't require that. And the reality is that the 2018 elections will have an enormous impact on policy. So when we say moving your issue to center stage in 2018, we mean both legislative sessions and in the elections. And as we discuss in our book, Preparing to Win, there's a whole lot of things that 501c3 organizations can do to drive their issues into the policy discussion during elections, and that's what we encourage you to do. Those things that, if you are C3, use those tools to legally drive issues into elections. And of course, if you're not a C3, then go wild, because this is the most important thing to talk about, to work on. This is politics, is the 2018 election. So let me first talk generally about why we should be bold in 2018, and then I'll give six examples of reasons, specific things that you can get out of it. The 2016 election, we've got to take a message from that. And the message is, I think, that voters want us to fight for them, and that they don't necessarily see progressives fighting for them. It's not because we're not fighting for them, but because we're not communicating to them what we're doing in a way that they will understand. And part of communicating to them is creating an agenda that they can understand makes a real difference to them. We need to go on the offensive and relentlessly pursue, debate, and win bold progressive policy reforms that people can clearly see themselves are going to improve their lives. They have to see that it benefits them personally. That's the lesson of 2016. So we need to press ideas that show a stark contrast between progressive policies and right-wing policies. And we need to lay the groundwork to make bigger and bolder progressive reforms possible in the future. So, we do stuff like that. We introduce legislation, but what we're saying here is you cannot just introduce a bill like we've been doing year after year after year. This is the year to plan and run a real advocacy campaign, whether you are with a group, whether you're an activist, whether you're a lawmaker or a policymaker. This is the year to do it in an organized fashion where you create a policy campaign in the 2018 sessions that carries over into the election, so that you set up your issues in early 2018 that carry over and are, a main part of the discussion in the elections of 2018. Let me ask Dave to describe it. We had this conversation in our conference in July with like 120 state legislators. What would you say that conversation was, Dave?
Sure. Yeah. No. I guess I would just echo the things that you laid out. If we don't define the environment that voters are going to be making decision in 2018, conservative forces and conservative legislators are going to do it for you. Maybe kind of just in the wake of the horrific events in Virginia, and frankly the poor leadership the president exerted on it, that we have a choice of defining an election that expands and creates opportunity and equality for people and get people excited about that, or we're going to run into a campaign that's going to be trying to rehash the Civil War and center around legitimacy of the Confederacy. And what do I mean by that? Well, people are going to run to their corners. We know that's an incredibly, it's going to play, frankly, I mean, into the conservatives' base to gin up support and action to fight for, I guess, a flawed sense of what the good old days and what used to be. And the answer is, well, what are we offering? Said another way, I mean, just what you were talking about, Bernie, is like the 2016 election cycle. I mean, we went into, a national presidential election in which the message and the strategy was to find that, Hillary Clinton was not Donald Trump, not what does election of Hillary Clinton, or frankly, people who share her value and policy priorities, etc., what do those things deliver for working America, for all Americans, for our communities, and you just go down the line. It was, a character referendum that at the end of the day left people asking this question, like, what do a group of candidates actually stand for? What do the political parties stand for, and things like that? And so we need to not list out a laundry list of issues. We need to lay out a framework. We use an issue, we use a policy frame to shape the conversation about what we stand for, to really move a values conversation, to define that in the most simplest of terms that our average voter can, will listen to, receive, and then be used to help inform who do they want to be putting into the decision-making chairs, whether that's at the local level, the state level, and beyond. But it is something that has been lacking, and the left particularly so. We've got no shortage of issues and ideas, but in terms of really making certain that we're nesting those issues with all the advocacy groups on the ground, the grassroots activism, harnessing the energy on the left that gets galvanized because, oh my God, Donald Trump gets elected president, and what does that mean? We're 9 months down the road here, and we still aren't galvanizing a policy agenda that's going to be able to hold the attention, the passion, the enthusiasm going into 2018, unless our progressive champions harness this opportunity right now for all the reasons that Bernie outlined.
Yeah, and I think that we had a great conversation about this at our conference, and what we're urging people to do is, you all have policies that you're working on, or policy areas, but there are a couple of choices to be made. One is, well, first of all, there's the choice of whether to be proactive or defensive. And so often our side is just opposing things, which makes it hard to tell Americans what we're for. So we're urging that bills be introduced that demonstrate what we're for, even in a red state, so that you can say this is what progressive governance is. The second thing is, you can pick between bills what's going to work in 2018 and what isn't. Not that we're suggesting that you don't introduce the bills that you normally introduce, but which of them has a shot at making a difference in the public conversation, and focus more attention on that and build a real policy campaign around it.
Hey, Bernie, I can jump in and go one time, because I think that I want to really underscore that point, that, the speed in which our advocacy groups and even elected leaders will come out to try to fight against something and falling far short of defining what we stand for. I think if we look at the last failed attempt by Donald Trump and his Republican allies to destroy healthcare as we know it in America and throw 20 million plus people off healthcare and have horrible consequences. A lot of mobilization zeroed in on trying to defend against these actions, but in that process, a leadership void, not just beyond a defense of and celebrating the success of expanded healthcare. Frankly, I think that seeped through, but almost I'm gonna say accidentally because of the actions that the other side was leaving, and this is the consequence that would result from. Not well, what are we fighting for? And frankly, on the left, you've got how do we make the goalpost? Universal access to healthcare for all people, or reforms that are valid and are needed to improve the quality of healthcare for all people. And whether other progressive champions have specific ideas on how to do that and really be innovative, but to kind of define themselves as we are the people who fight for healthcare for all, and they are the people that will take it away from you. It was we were very much wedged and trapped into this kind of defense of the ACA and Obamacare, and really at the whims and reaction of what the other side was pushing out. Victory gets celebrated. Obamacare is still standing, but it's noticeably silent on the left about, well, what's next? What is the defining contrast between us and them when it comes to healthcare? And what are the proactive things that we can be doing to, again, capture the energy that was there and people prepared to fight for it, but to channel into doing things? And there's some examples of some really good ideas that I think actually are being introduced, but really institutionalizing that, incorporating that into a large cadre of voices, we're falling far short of.
That's a great example. That's playing itself out in state legislatures and local governments controlled by conservatives all over the country, where all we're doing is we're being perceived as defending the status quo. Well, nobody really likes the status quo, and it doesn't display your values. Yeah, what we need to be saying what we're for as we're explaining why we're against this horrible stuff. Yes. And it doesn't divert you, it actually strengthens your argument so that people see the choice as not the status quo versus the conservative wreck everything, but they see it as a choice between our plan and their horrible plan. And, voters and Americans, residents, your own communities, when you walk door to door, they don't understand the technicalities of policy. They need to hear the broader debate, and we're not giving them our side.
Right. I think it's also important to note that there's a predisposition that voters have, and it's largely as a result of who's championed what or what groups have championed what over the years. When you ask who is going to be better for business, it's generally going to be conservatives that will be, the public will go, yeah, that group over there. Who's going to be fighting for the downtrodden, the vulnerable, etc.? The public shifts and well, it's the left over there because that's what they fight for. When we come to these, healthcare, I mean, this is like I mean, I think we're at this pivotal point of really defining who's going to own that. I mean, I would say we go back 8 years that an election, I mean, a major plank of a presidential election that results in Obama getting elected is this is the group that's going to fight for health care for all people, and the other side saying no. And we would come to economics, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more in detail. But I mean, we literally went into an election cycle in which who do you trust to improve the economy, or I guess, and they break it down a little bit further, to improve the economic conditions for working families, middle-class families, etc. What has historically been an advantage point that the left kind of went in without any more details than that, demonstrated, I mean, kind of a slip away, and largely because there wasn't a demonstrated focal telling of what we stand for, what we're for, in the context of, I mean, also, and why we're for that, and that is the reason we're against tax cuts for the rich and tax cuts for corporations, and all in the sort. So I think when we think about this in the broad messaging pieces, that champions of policy and really streaming it along, so not just the idea, but how we effectively communicate it, how do we make it part of the broader public narrative that is being discussed, that voters, I mean, again, voters don't live in vacuums. They're products of the environment and what people are talking about. And if we make it all about things that create the conditions that benefit conservative candidates, well, you're going to get conservative candidates. If you, I mean, flip the script and create the space and what policy allows for, I mean, bill introductions, what it allows for is to grab the microphone and talk about it. And as a result of that, every other elected leader has a microphone that can grab to talk about it. And our activists that have been charged as a result of the results of the last election have an opportunity to plug into and beat the drum, if you will, to shape that environment. So,
what I'll do is I'll go through 6 very solid reasons to be proactive and to do this, and then we'll go to questions. And I'll do this rather briefly, I think, because I think we've started to make our point. So 6 advantages for a proactive strategy, okay? One is that it educates. You know, when you go proactive, when you say what you're for, it gives you the chance to introduce ideas to policymakers and the media and think tanks and, you know, influential people that they didn't think about that before. You know, they're just thinking about defensive. It's like, oh, well, so we could solve it this way. And it, you know, it shows that we're the ones that are thinking, because obviously the other side is not doing any thinking other than how can we hurt people. The second is that it generates coverage. You know, obviously there's coverage when the other side does something horrible, but they control that coverage. They decide what the horrible thing is that they're going to do. They decide on the timing of that horrible thing, and we just get into the stories, you know, about the 5th or 6th paragraph where the reporter says, so what do you think about this policy that's going to kill thousands of people? And we say, oh, we don't think it's a good idea to kill people. When we have our own proactive policy, introduce our own bills, you know, we control the timing. We can hold the press conference. We can have a series of opportunities to get press over and over and over again. You know, we could build a coalition around the policy ahead of time and hold a press conference about the coalition. You know, we could have a study about the policy and release the study and have another press conference. You know, we can have the introduction of the bill and have a press conference there. We can have a press conference at the time of the hearing. You know, if the thing is defeated in a committee, we can have a press conference about the defeat. If the chairman of the committee refuses to hold a hearing, we can have a press conference about, you know, come on, let's have a hearing on this policy. so that when it is a proactive policy, we control when we get press. When it's their bill and we're just reacting, we very rarely control the press. 3, proactive frames issues. So the right wing has a history of framing their issues, like death tax or partial birth abortion or job creators, with clever words. The most effective way to frame a debate is to select a policy that will be debated, right? If we make the debate about fair wages and benefits, that's positive for us and it's bad for the other side. You can, you can frame the debate to our advantage by picking issues that are popular or that are popular with our base. Either way, either you want to generate, either you want to push the persuadables or you want to push turnout and excite our base. And there's so many different opportunities to do this, and we'll talk about some more specifically in the second part. The 4th thing is that it requires or pushes people to take a position. So, if you've got some policy and you don't put it into legislation, you have virtually no opportunity to force your opposition to take a position one way or the other. If you have a bill, you can start sending letters, are you for or against this, and start bringing it up at town meetings, for or against SB 123. Whereas if there's no bill, they're just going to say, well, there's no bill, so there's nothing for me to take a position on. I'm for fair housing or I'm for clean environment or whatever, but I can't take a position on something unless there's a bill. So have a bill. 5, it helps you build your coalition. Sure, we build our coalitions against the other side. Yeah. But you can recruit people much more effectively and more broadly by having proactive ideas that make them excited, right? So if you're against some kind of health policy, sure, people are trying to protect the ACA, but if you went out and said, what we're really trying to get here is health care for everybody. Everybody should have a right to health insurance and health coverage. You're going to get a whole lot more people excited, and they're going to get out there and fight. And that's, proactive, works better to build the coalition. And finally, and we've been making this point, so I won't belabor it, but if you put that proactive legislation out there during sessions, both state legislative, county, city, town, whatever, that's the way to lift it up for the election season. It makes it much more likely to be a subject, much easier to push as a subject, instead of being, something that they've never had to debate before, and you're bringing it up, where do you stand on this housing proposal? It's, look, we've been trying to get you to support HB 234 for the past 6 months, and you won't take a position. We're in an election right now. You have to take a position. And in an election, you can do that. It's much more effective if there is a bill than if there isn't a bill, and that's what we're trying to get. So let's talk about that, and then we'll go to, well, what kind of bills would work well in 2018, because we've got a bunch of suggestions.
Sure. I mean, this is really the opportunity. So, like the stuff that Bernie and I have been talking about, like, how is what are people's reaction to that? Do you see it happening in your local community, in your state? If so, what are some good examples where You feel like there's getting some traction, it's having an effect. Do you concur with, I guess the premise of both, what Bernie and I are talking about is the importance that this happens, and if it's not happening, as we move into some examples of where this could happen, push allies, put progressive champions, push them to do it. If there were examples where it is happening, but it's not gaining as much traction, like let's brainstorm that conversation. Like, how can we get activists and groups and other people to help lift up some of these other challenges that are out there? So we'll open it up. People can type in their questions. They can raise their hand.
I mean, people who are environmental activists should be doing whatever they can about climate change. Right now, we have our second unusual hurricane coming, and every jurisdiction can do something that's related to climate change, even if it's just a study of what your town needs to do to prepare for climate change, because we have to continually push against the climate change deniers. That would make a great issue through 2018.
And I've seen, there's some examples in which I've seen local communities, they take on this. There are national campaigns, 50 by 30, a 50% reduction of carbon emissions by 2030. All right, let's set that goal. What are the things that we can be doing, incentivizing, evaluating, measuring, to bring attention to why this is so important, and really seize it the opportunity? The science is clear. You don't have to have necessarily a hurricane. We had, a few years ago in my neck of the woods, we had a 300-year storm that rolled through, which by itself would be like, oh, if it was an completely episodic thing, except we've had quite a few 100-year storms that have landed within the last few years. And just as a matter of a few weeks ago, just the climate changing behavior of the violence or damage that these small things can create. So that's on people's mind, and we're not trying to play into the politics of fear. It's like, this is before us. What are the things that we can be doing to address this? Because we're committed to the long game. We're committed to a world of that serves future generations, and we all have a role to play in that. It doesn't require a member of Congress to introduce something to try to tackle this. It can be as simple as, evoking an action to say, hey, the president pulls out the Paris Accord. We're standing up to pledge to be part of the solution. The study, again, a conversation, an affirmation of these things that really gives an opportunity for the environmental community to organize, to bring attention, to galvanize, to again, shape, the dominant opinion of people, so that it helps create the conditions that when people are making a decision on who are they going to put in decision-making spaces, do they pick one that are aligned with the priorities that are listed there? They pick someone who's on the fringe, on the outside. And if we don't give people, again, not just a platform, but the frame on how to kind of consider and evaluate questions, we're not going to get there. And we are already, from a timing point of view, we are in the moment. You don't have the luxury of doing this weeks before an election. We've got to change it. The last point, and then I'm going to take some of these questions that are coming through, that we recognize that every election is nationalized, whereas your midterm elections generally kind of delve more into domestic policy, state policy, etc., and kind of, in many cases, could run away from or I could say not super engaged in some of the national political discourse. We don't have that luxury today. It is what it is. And as a result, we need to be, I guess, like, mold our strategy to take in consideration those new realities, and be able to meet to lay out, a bold agenda that really holds the same intensity on the left, and frankly marginalizes our opponents, puts them in a bad position, makes it hard for them to defend their positions, to create the conditions that help change the outcome in some of these elections, and frankly building the political will and support to long-term, and hopefully not too long-term, actually achieve the policy outcomes we're looking for. So we have a question that posed to me asking about the gubernatorial races, and ask why this is so important, because the gubernatorial campaigns, and we have some even this year, but also most of the governor races up in 2018, because of the impact on redistricting. This seems to be critical, and can redistricting be one of these types of things that lifts up kind of to lay out a bold agenda around what fairness can be, or fairer elections. So, Bernie, want to react to that? Like, does redistricting fit the mold of bold?
I think it can. Although I think that it's more likely to galvanize our side than to move the persuadables, just because they don't understand anything about the process. But this is an election where an issue that galvanizes our side is pretty much as good as an issue that moves the persuadables. I think it can be done. Although, I'd suggest that there needs to be some research about what's the best way to say it, so that people really understand it. It can get to be an awfully wonky conversation.
Yep.
But this is really about one man, one vote, and this is really about fundamental fairness in our democracy, and that's what has to get across.
Right. And I think, as being part of a democracy frame, that we have a democracy that has been taken over by corporate interests and everything like that. I think that's, it's a little bit around there, and I've actually had the opportunity to sit in some focus groups recently that tried to stoke this and this conversation, and Bernie's absolutely right. People don't understand it. Average voters think, frankly, both major political parties game the system to give them the advantage. It doesn't affect them. They don't really completely understand the difference between reapportionment and redistricting. They know there's a census. They know what that is, but they don't really know where their congressional district starts or ends. They don't really understand that it's state legislators that are drawing the lines and not congressional. There's all of that, and so the wonky nature of it, I think, falls out of order. Now, the urgency of gubernatorial candidates that are going to be progressive champions pushing ideas to make the case and why they should be elected, for that, we talked about making it's for the world. Yes, the 2018 election is super critical for the redrawing of seats. That's going to dictate, rightly or wrongly, is going to dictate the predisposition of a lot of these state legislative and congressional legislative seats for the next decade. So I think on both ends, it underscores why this is so important that we do this, because gubernatorial candidates that sound like holding up the status quo and not being bold enough when it comes to helping raise the wages of working people, doing more to improve public education in their respective state, and you just go down the line. If you aren't effective at defining what you stand for, and particularly in that very vein, be able to define sharply the contrast between whether it's the incumbent or a conservative candidate, I think the outcome it's going to be bleak. I mean, the conditions are shaping up to be one that progressive champions who are running for office should walk into. May have some advantage. I mean, and I'm not one to spend a lot of time, I mean, reading polls that dictate this. I mean, I think the best example, we saw like a special election with huge millions of dollars spent, most expensive congressional election of all time. And then another congressional race, basically the same night, where virtually no resources were spent, and the performance among the natural base about the same. And so I don't know if you can say that a year from now or so that you're going to see that play out the same it is now, but it definitely is an indication that the left is better, is more, I guess, intently focused, passionate, wanting to try to address some of these things. We've got to give them an outlet to be able to do that. And I mean, I guess it works both ways, that the activists also need to be turning to their progressive allies in elected office to say, we need you to fight for this, and we will help you. So it's not like we do, you follow. It's this, we need to get it working on both cylinders.
Should we go on to?
Let's move on. I'm looking at the time. I want to make sure we cover everything.
Yeah. Now, when you're trying to figure out what's going to work in 2018, I want to emphasize there's economic and there's non-economic. They both work, but I want to group together the economic because it's so darn important. In 2016. Hillary Clinton didn't really put across an economic program. I mean, certainly it was in the budget, but I don't think there was a single television ad in any state that talked about her economics whatsoever. And this is why it's so important. This chart shows compensation versus productivity. Productivity is what we all produce in value, in wealth, through the year. And starting in the 70s sometime, average people stopped getting the benefit of the wealth that they created. And that the compensation was just flat, while the productivity, while the additional wealth year after year that was created went to the rich. And people don't know this. You can't explain this. This is not something that's going to win any election to show them this chart. They're not going to understand it. But you need to understand that people are miserable. They're economically miserable. They have good reason to be miserable, and this is the reason that they are miserable, is that, to put it not very mildly, their money has been stolen year after year after year. Average people create wealth and they do not benefit from it. And only a tiny group of people benefit from it. So, that's what has happened. But we don't have a story to tell voters about that. I mean, Bernie certainly told a story that worked with a lot of people, but there aren't a whole lot of progressives out there that are telling a story that describes this. And instead, what persuadable voters are hearing is a story about how people of color, whether they're African Americans or they're Latino Americans or they're immigrants or they're Muslims, that they are the ones that are taking away people's economic comfort, their security through welfare of one kind or another, or they're taking their jobs or whatever. The point is that the other side has a narrative. It's completely and utterly false, but it's a narrative, and we don't have one. So how do we tell this narrative? Well, we have to be for some things, and I'm going to give you some examples, then we'll talk about non-economic things. Okay. So I'm just going to give you 12 examples. Some of them can be done at the state level, but an awful lot of them can be done at the state or local level. I mean, the first one is to have legislation that substantially increases taxes on the rich and at the same time slightly lowers taxes on everybody else. This is what we stand for. Do we ever introduce that bill? No, we never do, except Senator Art Haywood in Pennsylvania introduced that bill. It is spectacularly popular. It's one of the most popular things you could possibly do because people understand that they're getting screwed by the rich. They understand that the system is rigged for the rich, and if we show what we actually stand for, it works. No one ever does it. I mean, what would be the harm? If you're in a red state, what would be the harm? The second is similar, is to simply close tax loopholes for wealthy individuals. It depends on your state or locality, but for example, you could increase the capital gains tax rate. You do not have to be consistent with federal taxes. Many states aren't. You can increase the carried interest tax rate, which is a totally unfair situation. You could limit mortgage interest deduction, so that people don't get the deduction for, preposterously expensive properties. It's not that hard, and it doesn't exactly matter if the bill has no chance of passage. What matters is that we tell Americans that we're on their side. And they would totally agree with this. This would poll off the charts. Similarly, closing corporate tax loopholes, which, depends upon your state. Some states don't really have any corporate taxes to speak of. But depending on your state, there's a lot of different things that can be done that people would totally support it. We just have to introduce such legislation and talk about it. Here's some things that are probably much more familiar to you. Minimum wage. There's very few states where you could not do another minimum wage increase. Even if you did one recently, you could do another. It's just about the most popular thing that you can do. And it's enormously beneficial to the economy. Dave can tell you about Michigan, but it's very, very strong. Paid sick days, which has been talked about quite a bit, and just started to get adopted in various locations. This is preposterously popular. And it's like 80%. Even hardcore conservatives support this because it's common sense. Why that isn't on a platform in every single jurisdiction, I do not know. It's a no-brainer. Also, equal pay, interestingly, is tremendously popular. It's hard to write the legislation honestly, but as something to talk about what we stand for, it's enormously popular. Corporate influence. The Supreme Court has made it so that corporations can do just about anything, but you can require disclosure. You can require greater disclosure than currently exists. You can require more detailed disclosure, more timely disclosure. There isn't any voter, even hardcore right-wingers, that are going to oppose that. Why would they? It's just a tiny group of people who are involved. Stop drug company price gouging. Now, everybody hates the drug companies. Everybody. The Democratic Party laid off prescription drug companies because President Obama made a deal with them to pass the ACA, which was a good deal, and he was right and everything, but he's not president anymore, so we don't have to lay off them anymore. There's a bill in Maryland that was enacted that empowers the Attorney General to go after any drug company that has an unjustifiable increase in prices, like the EpiPen. It's extremely popular. Why we don't do that everywhere, I do not know. Curtail government subsidies. This depends upon what jurisdiction, what you're in, and what they currently do. But anything that's a government subsidy, the companies come in and say, we're going to create jobs and blah blah blah, but there's no voter that's for that stuff. Maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit. It would be wildly popular to go after subsidies. Enhanced lobbying disclosure. That is to, most jurisdictions require disclosure of what people are lobbying on, but you can always tighten it up, and it would always be popular, I believe, because people's perceptions of the legislative process are very negative. And pay to play. Now this is a very strong idea, but would be wildly popular, and that is, if you're going to be a company that seeks a state or government or local contract or subsidy, you can't give campaign contributions. You just can't. That puts you out of the running, because that's pay to play. You're paying candidates in order to hopefully get contracts afterwards. You just say, no, go ahead and make your contribution, but if you do that, you are debarred from bidding for contracts or receiving subsidies. This would be very popular. It would be something that progressives ought to stand for, and I don't know why we don't do it. And the last one here is to make willful wage theft or safety violations a criminal offense. Employers do stuff because they understand that they're going to make more money violating the law than paying the fine, basically. So, okay, let's not make it about a fine. We're going to arrest you. You can do that. I mean, your local government probably can't, but your state government can. Make it a crime to willfully provide, do these things, because they are doing it willfully. Okay, those are economic. Now I'm going to run fairly quickly over some things that are non-economic that you'll find highlighted in the progressive agenda. Don't ask immigration status. This is very important right now. Whatever jurisdiction you're in, state, local, a county, a town, anything, if you have any kind of law enforcement agency, you just tell them you will not involve yourself in asking anybody about their immigration status unless you're absolutely required to by federal law or by court order. Racial profiling. This is another issue that is, has a great chance of mobilizing the base. if you have if any kind of city, county, or locality that has police can do this. Hate crime prevention. This is something that's mostly done in states, but you can increase protections under hate crime laws, which are kind of important right now. LGBT anti-discrimination, which can be done in both cities and localities and states. Disclosure or transparency in how money is being spent through charter schools and vouchers. Important in education would be very popular. Renewable portfolio standard, this is one way to address climate change. Police reform, again, this is something that would really solidify our base. And there's a lot of different ways you can go after this. Codify Roe v. Wade. Right now, the Roe v. Wade is in the most serious trouble that it's been in since it was, announced by the Supreme Court. And states can pass laws that put Roe v. Wade into their statutes. Or protect abortion clinic patients. Polls show that nobody is in favor of harassing women who are going into and out of abortion clinics. 10% would favor that, 90% would favor a law to prevent it. Automatic voter registration. This is increasingly being done, kind of a pushback against voter ID, is let's make it easier for people to vote. And those are just some examples. I'm sure that whatever you're working on, there's some aspect of it that would make a good issue in 2018 if you could build a campaign around it. So, questions?
So here again is like another the opportunity. We have ideas that have the ability to be, I think the way to think about it is mini campaigns that will really arrange the stage in which the big electoral contests happen in 2018. Are you aware of any of these things that are happening in your neck of the woods? Are you leading on any of these? Do you have expressed interest in any of these? Let us know. This is really the opportunity to talk about these things. Got a question here from Lydia from Arizona asking, can calling for immigration reform be part of this proactive policy, proactive strategy to set the tone the upcoming election? And I guess particularly in the wake of DACA, the president's action to end the DACA program, in the protection for Dreamers, it came here as children and put them at risk of deportation in the wake of the pardon of Sheriff Joe, and the wake of, just the list goes on and on. Bernie, you want to react to that?
Yeah, isn't it kind of amazing that that's not part of the conversation right now in Congress or in the newspapers? Okay, so we're only talking about one side, destroying people, and nobody's saying there is another way, and that is to fix the broken laws that have been broken because only one side has been standing in the way. Only conservatives or right-wingers have been standing in the way. But we're generally talking about state and local stuff here, so let me say that in a state or locality, there's a bunch of things that you could do that affect immigrants and DACA people. And those bills should be introduced in order to do what your state or locality can do, despite the horrible stuff in the federal government. So, for example, don't ask, tell all of your jurisdiction's employees that they are not allowed to ask any questions about somebody's immigration status, and you advertise the fact that you're not going to ask, so that people understand that they can come forward to report a crime, to say that they've been a witness to a crime, to say that they know about some health violations, to say they know about some safety violations. And when you do that, it's not just benefiting the immigrant, it's benefiting all of us. Because if we don't let people feel like they can report violations, then the violator is going to hurt us next. Whether it's a criminal, whether it's an employer, whether it's a property owner, it benefits all of us.
Peter asks a question, I think we've been dancing around it for a little while, is like, well, if all these ideas are here and they're all proven to work, be very popular with the public, why aren't more elected, I guess I'm going to paraphrase here, like elected leaders and candidates, if you will, seizing the moment to do these things?
Well, right after this, we're going to give two examples of where they have. In Michigan, a very well organized campaign around reproductive rights, and in Maryland, a very well organized campaign to push back against Trump. But generally speaking, that's not how we've done business, and people need to see that now is different than then.
Right. In some cases, that there is examples in which a minimum wage bill has been introduced, but it starts and ends there. Maybe a press release went out about it. There wasn't an effort to try to lift up those, to promote, to organize, to get people to contact their legislators, or use it as an accountability campaign against people who are opposed to those efforts. And a number of the ideas and bills that listed out in the progressive agenda that Bernie talked about at the top of the presentation, we might see introduced in some form. Frankly, we don't see enough of these bills introduced in aggregate, but even if they're introduced in some form, that's the start. But it's got to be just like in a candidate's campaign, a political campaign, repetition, repetition, repetition. It needs to be part of the overall narrative that we're thumping and pounding away over a long, protracted period of time. We talked about just a little while ago that we don't have the luxury to start this process in the summer of next year. That now is the moment to have these ideas laid out there, design the plan, an organized effort to to inform the public that this is an opportunity, to engage the media, to cover it, to use it as an opportunity to force elected leaders to respond, and be incorporated into the answer, why should we pick you or folks like you in 2018 or sooner for that matter. Because it's absolutely critical. Because the other thing is, like, what is the alternative? Just let things move by the wayside. I think Peter's question really does get at the core. I don't have a full answer. I have maybe one answer. Let me back up. I feel like I'm starting to ramble, but I actually do have one theory. I wonder if it is and I'd be interested in your reaction to this, that especially on the left, when we're so quick to have issues and we throw them out, but often we don't talk about them from a value-centered way, or more importantly, in a way that intersects with the values of our audience, whether it's our base or that persuadable audience. That is, I mean, a chronic, long-time problem. And so there've been a lot of efforts like, okay, about narrative. I mean, what are the components of a strong narrative, and how do we talk from a value-based frame? All very good. But then I think in some cases maybe we've overdone it. Or people left off, oh, by the way, you need to be fighting for something. And people have to be able to come away in a very clear way, not get trapped into policy jargon and process of governance and all of those types of things. But more specifically, okay, this is what you believe, great. How is my life going to be better because of it? How are all of our lives going to be better because of it? And you've got to give me the meat to hang on to. I mean, I think it's, I feel like we've overcompensated by moving away to kind of, instead of our laundry list of issues, and leave it out there and hoping that the public was going to digest it, when the public would just glaze over when you throw out your 10 points or even your 9 points you're going to focus on and push people to talk broad, more generalized, value vision, if you will, that we've lost the meat of what all this is for. Can you react to that?
Yeah, I mean, Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi introduced this thing called the better deal, and it doesn't say anything to people. It doesn't make people understand what we're talking about. We have a lot of workshops where we talk about messaging, but they all come back to people have in their heads stereotypes and biases and prejudices, and positive and negative. And we have to connect to what's already in people's heads and make them understand that we're on their side. They have lots of ideas in their heads already that are the same as ours. We need to connect to them, and without an agenda of legislation which proves that we're on their side, why should they believe it?
Right. No, I think that's very, very important. I guess question before we get into we only have 15 minutes more. But any questions, reaction to this? I'm sure people are sucking in all this knowledge, or reacting to it, and maybe they're driving. but we really do. Interesting, kind of your reaction to, really employing the strategy, really putting the strategy on steroids, in the sense that more people doing it, candidates for office in the future doing it, elected leaders doing it. This isn't, again, I think it's really important to stress that this isn't about being reckless. This is about, in some cases, being fearless in defense of what we believe in. And as progressive champions, it's so incredibly critical. I've seen too many policy debates kind of dissolve to a position that our progressive force kind of comes out of the gate from the what would arguably be what should be the final negotiated position, and as a result, everything shifts further and further to the right, blurring the lines further and further about what does one side stand for versus the other. Making it harder and harder because we're not having these public debates, these public declarations about what we stand for, making it harder and harder for people to identify who's really on my side. Um, and I would say that kind of the long-term consequence of this, if we don't do all of this, then the campaign literature in 2018, the news coverage of issues in the 2018 cycle will be the same drab that's not really achieving the 6 things that Bernie outlined that what a bold proactive agenda can do. At I guess at its worst, we don't achieve the electoral shift and balance in power. At best, I mean, absent the bold strategy, we gain some seats, but not enough to hold and drive. And I mean, I'm saying kind of like it leaves us rudderless to really move and to put into action these ideas. And this is going to further frustrate, particularly our base, but the electorate as a whole.
I guess we should go to...
Oh, I got one more here.
Good.
All right. So in red states, we don't introduce them because they have been successfully portrayed as crazy coast, I guess like east or west coast liberal ideas. It's difficult to defend ideas that require the government to get more involved with the lives or protects more people from discrimination. I love this question at this point because why we're not doing it in the red areas. So we're going to let the red areas. And so I think, Susan, I wouldn't say that it's just red states. It is red areas in blue states. It's and there's no one making the case of why these are good ideas. Even if we put the research out there, it says no, actually the public supports raising the minimum wage, and, or the public supports paid sick day for all people, or the public supports that corporations should pay their fair share. Overwhelmingly, in the most reddest of red areas, support that idea. We don't do that because you're right. The conservative forces will come out and try to like hammer it, and we're left not fighting for it. So Bernie, why don't you weigh in there, and then we'll talk about strategies to publicize these issues.
Well, you already kind of explained it's these ideas are already popular. When the other side attacks them, you know, they may knock down their popularity by a little bit. But if you start out with an idea like paid sick leave that starts out at about 80%, all the attack in the world is going to bring it down to 75%. You still have a wildly popular issue. It's just that our policymakers, our advocates in these red jurisdictions don't get that they can start with bold progressive ideas, and even when they're attacked, they'll still be very popular.
Right. I mean, I think there's one lesson from this, that if we don't come and push with these ideas, then the conversations can continue to trek to the right on all of these fronts. And certainly there are middle ground, good policy that is going to be maybe void of the rabid conservative defense or reaction. And we maybe achieve some good policy outcome. What I will say in almost every circumstance where that happens, it is that policy solution, that idea, that victory, that the narrative that can help support all of that is not going to be effective in mobilizing our base. And again, at best, majority support, the persuadable, is not going to translate in electing people. Or again, changing that kind of the outcome of that. I'm also not advocating for like suicide marches too. I mean, if there's something that, first, I think we should like take a step back and go, let me look at this idea. Is there a way to actually get some localized research to demonstrate that there's public support here? And then again, the reddest of states and the reddest of jurisdictions, there's some creative ways without a huge amount of money that can demonstrate some of that. That's one thing that I think can start grounding, like, public's actually with us on this type of stuff. More importantly, the public of voters that are aligned with us out of the gate will the intensity of support will move, because that's also what these election outcomes are the product of, right? It's not just, yeah, I did a poll, majority supports this. It's like, where's the intensity? If the intensity is on our opposition side and not on our side, then they're actually, it can fuel motivation of our political opponents. The other thing is that we're not going to change that paradigm, that mindset and that dialogue unless we get people to move forward. Now, just said, yeah, and we'll move into the next section. So I'm going to share this personal story. When I was first elected to the legislature, I represented a leaning Democratic seat. When I served over a redistricting period that moved my district into a 50-50, and I remember my leadership coming to me a lot of things, the things that I believed in, and they're like, Dave, we're a little worried about you sticking your neck too far out in all these issues. And then there's like this balance thing. And unfortunately, I had great mentors that said, this is only worth doing if, you can sleep with yourself at night and live with yourself. And so, help, I guess, like solidify, I think, like my backbone to continue to fight for these things. And in some cases, when people say, well, this might not be super popular in a district, the reputation of fighting for my community, fighting for working families, it was cemented. And in a not so stellar election year, in a 50-50 type district, well-funded opponent, we overwhelmingly victorious. And I think, it did speak to a little bit about, and what did we do? That was a particular year that I remember grabbing onto the issue of credit scoring, use of credit scoring in insurance. And I just said, I ran my entire campaign around this idea that the state should be fighting for people and not insurance companies. Insurance companies shouldn't be using credit score to set insurance rates. Overwhelmingly popular. No one could defend it. And the result was it was just it was an example of beyond the national scope of elections, and this was some time ago. I fully acknowledge that, but I think it is one of the examples of like how you can grab something, you can root it in a foundation of values and principles, and use it as an example of what your leadership, if you're the candidate or the elected leader, can do, or what our belief system, if allowed to govern, can accomplish. And that's what the issue is allowed to happen.
I love that story. Mm-hmm. We've only got about 6 minutes left. Let me do this. I want to explain.
So actually, Bernie, I'm gonna have you respond to a question, because Susan had a follow up, which I think is very valid. Around, isn't energizing our base and attracting persuadables two diametrically opposed strategies? And I'd like you to speak to it, because I think you've done a lot with a lot of our messaging stuff and the messaging research is out there. If you can address that.
Sometimes, if we do things like minimum wage and paid sick leave and equal pay, and any of these things that are attacking the rich or the giant corporations or the insurance companies or the prescription drug companies, there's a whole lot of things you can do that are both mobilizing our base and persuading the persuadables. But there are other issues that are just going to mobilize our base, things like police reform and defending immigrants and things that are more identified with our base. But I think that you can do both. I think that you can have you can do both minimum wage and sick leave and do the police reform and the immigrant protections, and that they don't detract from each other.
Right. I mean, some of it is also is the nature of the beast too. Is that a lot of our persuadable audience is lower information. They make their decisions late. They're not engrossed in policy debates. I mean, because if they are, they're more predisposed to one side or the other. I mean, the economic every one of those economic issues will not alienate your persuadable. Every one of them actually will win over persuadables, and frankly, in our base, they're going to be more. The intensity is going to be high, and so there is an element of being strategic about. So, what are the things that you grab? And I think that the metric that you want to be looking for is things that excite our base and can win over persuadables. That should be part of the filter. The things, I mean, we talked about like conservatives. I mean, putting conservatives in a very bad position to defend their position or their current practice, etc. Something that has the ability that's easy to digest. I mean, if you're introducing me a whole new concept, I mean, if you're going to run a campaign on the importance of promoting financial literacy in the name of asset building in a local community as a core economic development strategy, you lost me at the first word. Now, is it all good public policy? Yes. You want to stay away from that, but it has the attraction and ability for a variety of people to engage: community groups, activists, legislators at a variety of levels, state level, local level, even national level for that matter. You want to be able to, for every person to be able to weigh in to take on a piece of an action. You want something that can be used as an accountability tool to demonstrate who's with us and who's against us, and hold accountable those who are against us. And you want something that can help lift up and sustain a narrative that's going to help shape the overall environment in which voters are making this decision. So that to me is like the metric that we go and use to kind of decide what you want to do. And the good stewards of democracy, we want the outcome. This isn't a game. We want the outcome to result in actually improving the conditions for working class, low income, and middle class families in America. We want good public policy that does something that helps people. At its core. All right, Bernie. I know we're running out of time, so why don't you?
Okay.
I think we're going to take one example. So
I just want to give the example that in Maryland, they actually did this in 2017. They created this what they call the Maryland Defense Act. It's 2017, but it's actually 6 bills, and they focused on passing these bills, and they all push back against Trump on climate change, on health, on financial protection, on school reform, on abortion, and they really marketed this as we're on one side and Trump's on the other. Which side is Governor Hogan, who's a moderate Republican or conservative Republican governor, and they're trying to put pressure on him. And then they would market each of these bills separately also, like this, and this is what happened. They passed all 6 bills. The governor allowed 5 of them to become law without his signature. He vetoed one of them, and it was overridden by the legislature, so they enacted into law all 6 of these. And then subsequently, this group of victories was used along with some other things that happened that were great, and it was advertised and promoted that the Democrats in Maryland, did all these good things, that they all, fought. They fit within a theme of fighting for Marylanders. At any rate, the point is, it's been done. It can be done. Another example is in Michigan, which is which Dave made happen, where they created this agenda for abortion rights and introduced 10 bills simultaneously. Dave, you want to briefly explain?
Sure. Yeah. I think this is. 10 bills, 5 in the House, 5 in the Senate, to galvanize and change the the dialogue around Michigan. I mean, just compare it different from Maryland, conservative House, conservative Senate, and a conservative governor, which has been actually making gains on abortion rights legislation over the years. And so this was, I mean, a concerted, organized, and planned effort to talk about this issue and bring it up in a way and research-based and tested, overwhelmingly popular. Most of these majority of Republican voters support. And certainly the aggregate, when you add everyone together, overwhelming support. Things that are simple: keeping politics out of the exam room, patients' rights to abortion information, prevent political interference from delaying abortion, Abortion Coverage Equity Act, preventing double standards. I mean, these are things that are, a lot of these things pulled directly out of the playbook, some tweaked to speak to some unique Michigan issues and trying to roll back gains that the opponents had made, with the purpose of kind of creating the conditions to weaken our opposition forces in this space. And we're really moving into a phase right now in which individual members will be, going up against an accountability state, very much like the example that Bernie gave. How does Representative so and X stand on these things? Easy to digest, easily understood, and really seizing off the Women's March, Indivisible, and a lot of other people who are hungry to fight for what they believe in and holding people accountable. I think silently we like to say that this contributed in part, this effort that's going out there, in part into the governor's almost in a surprise veto of a right to life license plate. Even if it's not directly related to that, it really is an opportunity to kind of change the conversation around abortion rights in a way that it's not perceived and used as a weapon against progressive candidates, but creates the conditions to result in some of these wins long term.
And we're out of time.
We're out of time. Yep. So it's the end of the session. Thank you everybody for joining. Thank you for the questions, the conversation. This is something that we've all got to take some ownership and responsibility if we're going to make happen. We are literally in the window, and I'm going to give it a 30, maybe 60-day window that the plans to do this have to be put in place soon, or we're going to run off the clock, and there's not going to be an opportunity, and we are going to be completely reactive to the conditions of the time. And I don't know about you, but I like to have a little more control of my destiny. I like to shape the world in which the conversation's happening, with the goal of helping produce some of these outcomes that we're looking for. So a bold, proactive agenda to set the tone and bring these issues center stage in 2018 is part of that, and I look forward to hearing everyone who's joined us ideas on this. Thank you very much for taking place. Bernie, thank you for leading us through this conversation. It's a conversation that we expect to keep revisiting at least over these 60 days.
Yes.
All right. Have a good one, everyone. Be sure to check out our webinars brought to you every other week, same time, same place. And if you happen to miss that, check out our YouTube channel, where recorded editions of past episodes, including this one eventually, can be downloaded and viewed at a later time. Thank you, everyone. Look forward to seeing you all next time.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.